Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 13 waiver wire pickups for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be going in depth into some running backs, wide receivers, as well as tight ends that I believe you guys should be looking to pick up off the waiver wire right now. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, because not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I would also like to ask that if you guys are on Twitter and would like to follow me on there, to please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the video description. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 13 waiver wire ads. Of note, there are 4 teams on bye for week number 13. We got the Carolina Panthers, the Cleveland Browns, the Green Bay Packers, as well as the Tennessee Titans. We'll begin this video by discussing the running back position, then we're going to pivot into the wide receivers, and then close out the video with the tight ends. So starting with the running backs, we have my number 1 overall running back, who is also my number 1 overall waiver wire pickup of the week, and that is Chuba Hubbard, running back of the Carolina Panthers. Again, I just discussed the fact that they're on bye along with the Cleveland Browns, the Packers, and the Titans, so you're not going to be able to use Chuba Hubbard this week. But that does not matter at all, because Christian McCaffrey was placed on the IR this week, and he is done for the season. That brings in a lot of question marks into what you guys are going to be doing next year in 2022 for your fantasy football drafts. Will you guys be willing to use your number 1 overall pick again on Christian McCaffrey? Because that pick this year would be considered a bust because he was injured. Last season would be considered a bust as well because he was injured. So that's 2 years in a row of Christian McCaffrey pile driving your fantasy football roster. Will people take him again at the number 1 overall pick next year? I don't think so. I would definitely look to lean with Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry. So let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about that. But let's get back on track into what this video is actually about. So like I said, Christian McCaffrey is on the IR and he's done for the season. So that is going to elevate Chuba Hubbard into the perfect role, which is a role he had earlier on in the season when Christian McCaffrey was banged up. His final game of being the lead running back before Christian McCaffrey ended up returning from injury was in week number 8 up against the Atlanta Falcons. In that game, Hubbard had 24 rushes for 82 yards, as well as a rushing touchdown. He also had 1 reception on 2 targets for 9 yards. He also had a fumble in that game, but you can kind of, brush that under the rug, just kind of push that away, because in my opinion, that did not really affect the game at all. I believe that Chuba Hubbard is in the perfect scenario for success. Now, I understand that Cam Newton absolutely shit the bed last week up against the Miami Dolphins, and a lot of people are going to proclaim that the Carolina Panthers are dead, that it doesn't matter if Mono Man Sam returns, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is, Cam Newton is washed up, blah, 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 and it's all over for the Carolina Panthers. In my opinion, I think that Cam Newton is still the best quarterback on this roster, and I do believe that Chuba Hubbard is going to have tons of value going forward, and I am very excited if he is on my waiver wire to pick him up. Like I said, I believe he's the number 1 waiver wire ad of the week, my number 1 overall waiver wire running back as well. I think this is a great situation, and I think Chuba Hubbard will succeed in this scenario, as he did earlier on in the season when Christian McCaffrey missed time. My next running back to add on the week is Alexander Mattison, running back of the Minnesota Vikings, going up against the Detroit Lions this week. A very somber week in terms of injury. Deebo Samuel gets hurt, Dalvin Cook gets hurt, Christian McCaffrey gets hurt. Now, Dalvin Cook tore his labrum while dislocating his shoulder up against the 49ers yesterday on Sunday. This is not a season-ending injury, though, but he may not be back for the next couple of weeks. In 2019, he suffered a very similar injury and missed 2 games, so you should expect somewhere around 2 or 3 games to be missed for Dalvin Cook. Following Dalvin Cook's injury, we did see Alexander Mattison step in as the number 1 running back on the team, having 7 rushes for 21 yards as well as a touchdown. He also had 3 receptions on 2 targets for 7 yards. And again, it is very sad that if you drafted Dalvin Cook at number 2 or you drafted number 1 with Christian McCaffrey, you're basically shit out of luck. But at least with Dalvin Cook, he's probably going to come back for your final games of the playoffs. So at least Dalvin Cook will be back. But Alexander Mattison, now, just like with Chuba Hubbard, is in an excellent position for success. Chuba Hubbard was never going to be used on your fantasy football team unless McCaffrey got hurt. Same thing goes with Alexander Mattison because the other running backs ahead of them are just so dominant. They are true workhorse running backs in the NFL, but I believe just like with Chuba Hubbard, that Alexander Mattison is going to be the clear workhorse running back for the Minnesota Vikings. I understand that they lost last week up against the Green Bay Packers, but this is a smash matchup up against the Lions, and I would not be surprised at all if Mattison was a top 5 running back at the end of the week. Next running back to discuss here is Jamal Williams, running back of the Detroit Lions, going up against the Minnesota Vikings. DeAndre Swift is considered day-to-day with a shoulder sprain that he suffered up against the Chicago Bears on Thanksgiving. He could return this week, but Dan Campbell came out and basically implied that he's not going to play, but didn't completely rule the situation out. So it's very likely, based upon what I've read about this injury, that he's going to end up missing a game or two, but this is nothing long-term. But that does still put Jamal Williams in a very solid situation to succeed, at least this week, up against the Minnesota Vikings. Following Swift's injury up against the Bears, we saw Jamal Williams have 15 rushes for 65 yards, as well as having 5 receptions on 5 targets for 18 yards. Jamal Williams is not DeAndre Swift, but at the end of the day, the Lions do still like to run the ball a lot, and they are going to put Jamal Williams in a situation to succeed, even if the Detroit Lions aren't a successful team on the football field. They may get absolutely bitch-slapped by the Minnesota Vikings in this game, but Jamal Williams could still have tons of value based upon how much he will be seeing the ball. I also think, like we saw last week up against the Chicago Bears, Jamal Williams will be seeing a bunch of dump-offs in this matchup, so I do like Jamal Williams a lot this week as well, making him my number 3 running back waiver wire ad of the week. Next up, we move to Dontrell Hilliard, running back of the Tennessee Titans, who is on a bye this week, just like we discussed earlier with the teams that are on bye. Dontrell Hilliard led the team in rushing up against the New England Patriots last week. This is still very important to note, though, that this is not Dontrell Hilliard's backfield as a lock. This is still very much a split share between him and D'Onta Foreman, but Hilliard, in my opinion, is still worthy of an ad. Last week up against the Patriots, 12 rushes for 131 yards and a touchdown. He was basically the only bright spot in this offense up against the Patriots. The Tennessee Titans are down fucking astronomical with injuries. They have Julio Jones on the IR. They have A.J. Brown on the IR. And Derrick Henry is out for the season. So Dontrell Hilliard, while he's not the second coming of Derrick Henry, he still will have some use in this offense. He also saw 1 reception on 2 targets for 2 yards. He also had a fumble in the game, but I don't think that's going to really impact him going forward. I do think that he is going to be very involved in this split share between him and D'Onta Foreman. Again, is the lock that Hilliard's going to rush every single week for over 100 yards? Of course not, right? But he is definitely a running back that I would be looking to add. Next up, we move to the penultimate running back in today's waiver wire video, and that is Matt Breida, running back of the Buffalo Bills, going up against the New England Patriots this week. Zach Moss was a healthy scratch last week for the Buffalo Bills, and in my opinion, Matt Breida looks better than Devin Singletary. Last week up against the Saints in that murder on Thanksgiving, 9 rushes for 26 yards and 2 receptions on 2 targets for a touchdown. That game was not even close up against the Saints. It was like O.J. Simpson was out there because they just absolutely laid the pipe down. They laid the murder game down on the New Orleans Saints. Matt Breida, to me, looks like he's the number 1 running back. Now, is there a chance that Zach Moss just magically gets thrown back into this lineup going forward, that maybe even he plays this week? 100%. So that's why I'm not sky high on Matt Breida, but I do believe that Matt Breida definitely looks better than Devin Singletary, and he's looked better than Zach Moss has looked this season. So I do believe that Matt Breida has a solid role inside of this offense. Thus, why I want you guys to be picking him up off the waiver wire. Final running back to discuss in today's video. Obviously, we got a lot more positions to talk about. We got wide receivers as well as the tight ends going forward. But final running back in today's video, Tevin Coleman, running back of the New York Jumbo Jets, going up against the Eagles this week. Coleman appears to be the clear lead back for the Jets in Michael Carter's absence, but I am going to pump the brakes on that statement a little bit, because I'm not here to tell you that this is a fucking mortal lock, that Tevin Coleman is the clear lead back going forward. He just was the clear lead back last week in that game up against the Houston Texans. Tevin Coleman had 45% of the snaps last week. Ty Johnson was in on 34% of the snaps, and Austin Walter was in on 24% of the snaps. Who the fuck is that guy? That guy just came in out of nowhere like an RKO from Randy Orton and vultured a touchdown from either Ty Johnson or Tevin Coleman, depending on who you started. In that game, Tevin Coleman had 16 rushes for 67 yards, 2 yards off of being very nice with 69. He also had 2 receptions on 3 targets for 3 yards. Again, this is far from a mortal lock that Tevin Coleman is the lead back on the team, but based upon what we saw last week, I think it is safe to say that Tevin Coleman probably will be the lead back on the team going forward, but this Walter fellow may end up vulturing a couple more touchdowns going forward, and I just know that is going to piss me off. Now we'll pivot into the wide receiver section of the video, so if you guys have ended up enjoying thus far, please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below if you are new, and if you're not new, make sure you hit that like button. Even if you are new to the channel, make sure you hit that like button as well. It does help me out a ton. So we begin with my number 1 wide receiver to add on the week, and that is Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver of the New England Patriots, going up against the Buffalo Bills this week in Buffalo. He is currently the wide receiver number 21 in half PPR. This man is the wide receiver number 21, and he's still available in a majority of leagues. While Jakobi Meyers is clearly out-targeting this man, game in and game out, it doesn't seem to matter at all, because when it's time to get that money, when it's time to get that bread, when it's time to score that touchdown, Jakobi Meyers is like John Cena. Mac Jones can't see him, but Kendrick Bourne is just wide open every time in the end zone, or even if he's covered, the guy looks like fucking Randy Moss in there and makes an amazing catch. Up against the Titans last week, 5 receptions on 6 targets for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns. I will add that 6 targets seems like a lot for Bourne, because as of recently, he's been getting like 4 or 5 targets every single game, but hey, maybe we'll see an uptick in targets for Bourne as the team realizes that, hey, this guy probably is the lead receiver on the team. Facing up against the Buffalo Bills is far from ideal, in my opinion, even with the Bills' defense not looking great prior to that game up against the New Orleans Saints. I still believe that the Buffalo Bills have one of the better defenses in the NFL, so Kendrick Bourne isn't like a must-start wide receiver, but based upon what we've seen recently, even with this matchup, he basically is, because of how often he's being targeted in the end zone for Mac Jones. So I like Kendrick Bourne a lot going forward, and I believe he's the number 1 waiver wire add at the wide receiver position on the week. Next up, we move to Russell Gage, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. This is far from an ideal matchup, but hey, Russell Gage has had 2 solid showings in a row, and with Calvin Ridley's return date basically being uncertain, he may not even come back all year. It's not like it's an injury. We have no idea when he's going to come back. So that's why I say it's uncertain that maybe he doesn't end up returning at all on the year. And that makes Russell Gage the number 1 receiver on the team, so he needs to be rostered, even though Matt Ryan looks like he's just gone, like he's just completely washed. But that has happened at points in the season, and then he has triumphantly returned and looked great. So maybe Matt Ryan is just a streaky quarterback this year, which is something that he hasn't really been throughout his career. Last week, up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in a cupcake matchup, Russell Gage had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 62 yards, as well as a touchdown. Again, this is far from a wet dream matchup for Russell Gage going up against the Buccaneers, but I still do believe that he needs to be rostered in all leagues because he is the number 1 wide receiver on the Atlanta Falcons until Calvin Ridley ends up coming back. Next up, we got Nick Westbrook, Ikain of the Tennessee Titans, who was on bye this week with A.J. Brown and Julio Jones on the IR. The ball has to be thrown to someone, and that someone appears to be Nick Westbrook. Ikain last week up against the Patriots, he had 2 receptions on 5 targets for 25 yards, but he scored a touchdown, so he had a alright day for fantasy football. Again, this guy isn't Julio Jones, he's not A.J. Brown, but he is the number 1 wide receiver on the team when both of them are out, so go ahead and roster Nick Westbrook. Ikain, again, you can't play him this week because he's on bye, but I do think he could be a reliable option until those 2 wide receivers return. Next up, we got Van Jefferson of the LA Rams going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. With Odell Beckham Jr. and Van Jefferson both having solid showings up against the Green Bay Packers, it seems like the pecking order here is very unclear. Cooper Kupp is obviously the number 1 guy. He's all the way at the top, but then below him is Odell the number 2 receiver in terms of targets week in and week out, or is it going to be Van Jefferson? To me, that seems like a pretty cloudy scenario. With all that said, though, up against the Packers last week, Jefferson had 5 receptions on 10 targets for 81 yards and a touchdown. He is a very solid player, and with Robert Woods obviously out for the season, that does give Van Jefferson a solid shot to be the number 2 guy on the team. And while the Rams have been a dumpster fire as of recently, while Matthew Stafford hasn't looked great, I still think this is a great matchup up against the Jaguars, and I do believe that Sean McVay and the Rams will eventually turn it around. If there was ever a week for it to happen, it would be up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I like Van Jefferson a ton this week. And to close out the wide receivers, we got Josh Reynolds of the Detroit Lions going up against the Minnesota Vikings this week. All year long, it has been damn near fucking impossible to dissect who the number 1 wide receiver is on the Detroit Lions. Some weeks, we've seen, oh, it's Khalif Raymond, and then I come on here and tell you to pick up Khalif Raymond, and then out of nowhere, that it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they're thinking, oh, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then magically it's back to Khalif Raymond, or it's some other wide receiver. Last week, it was that other wide receiver. It was Josh Reynolds, who just recently signed to the team. Josh Reynolds, if you guys don't know, was on the Tennessee Titans earlier on in the year, but he has that connection from the Rams with Jared Goff. So up against the Bears on Thanksgiving, 3 receptions on 5 targets for 70 yards and a touchdown for Josh Reynolds. Now, a question you might ask is, hey, Nick, since Josh Reynolds is the best receiver on a bad team like the Lions, does that have a lot of value? In my opinion, it still does, even if Jared Goff doesn't look all that good, even if this Lions offense is a complete and utter fucking unmitigated disaster. You got to find value somewhere in that offense, and it's going to be Jamal Williams, and I hope that it is Josh Reynolds going forward. My confidence in it, though, is not the highest. That's why he's my 5th waiver wire ad of the week at the wide receiver position, because, like I said, throughout the whole season, it has been just so up in the air who the number 1 wide receiver is because it changes so frequently, but I hope going forward that it is Josh Reynolds. And now we pivot into the tight end position. My first tight end to be adding on the week is Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears going up against the Arizona Cardinals this week. This week, Justin Fields' availability is very much up in the air, especially since he has a few cracked ribs. In my opinion, I don't think he's going to play in this game. I think if you're the Bears organization, you don't want to go ahead and sacrifice the guy you fucking picked in the first round, the guy you traded these picks for, just for no reason, right? You're not making the playoffs. Just play Andy Dalton, okay? But in my opinion, the quarterback doesn't really matter whether it's Justin Fields or Andy Dalton. It seems like they both like to heavily utilize Cole Kmet. Definitely we saw Andy Dalton do it last week, though. 11 targets on 8 receptions up against the Lions on Thanksgiving for 65 yards. This is not an ideal matchup up against the Arizona Cardinals, but I do think that with enough volume, for a volume play standpoint, I think Cole Kmet will be able to get enough volume to be utilized in this game, so I definitely will be starting him this week, and I will categorize him as a tight end that you guys need to pick up. And final tight end pickup of the week, final overall waiver wire pickup of the week is Foster Moreau, tight end of the Las Vegas, turn your volume down, the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Washington football team. Now this is a speculative ad because Darren Waller's health is up in the air. He avoided a major knee injury and suffered only a strained IT band. What does that mean? That means that his timetable is very much up in the air, and he could miss a game or two, or maybe he'll play through the pain and play this week up against the football team. If that is the case, then Foster Moreau, you don't want anything to do with them, because when Waller's there, Waller's going to be the guy. But if they decide to put Waller on ice for a week or two, then Foster Moreau would be in a chef's kiss, a Manufweek situation, because when Waller is out, they really do like to throw the ball to Foster Moreau. Last week up against the Dallas Cowboys, Moreau had 5 targets, 1 reception, and just 3 yards. I understand, not the greatest of games for him, but it's not like Waller was out for the whole game. And like I said, there have been tons of signs from this season as well as last year that Foster Moreau is a guy that Derek Carr likes to utilize for the Raiders, so I think that Foster Moreau should definitely be rostered, especially if you are the person who has Darren Waller. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting that like button. I would appreciate it a ton. I love you guys all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, goodbye.